Right, in today's lesson we're going to be factoring using the GCF. At the end of this lesson you will be able to factor by finding something that's called the greatest common factor. Alrighty, what we're going to be doing, first of all I'm just going to give you an example of what I'm even talking about by factoring. If we have a problem that looks like this, 5x times the quantity x plus 3. What we have done before in our previous videos is multiply. So if I multiplied out this expression, I'd get 5x to the second plus 15x. What we're going to be doing with factoring is pretty much reverse multiplying. We are going to be starting with the final answer, and we are going to break it up into its components, the 5x times x plus 3. So that's what I mean when I ask you to factor it. We'll start out with what I circled, and we'll end up with the expression that has parentheses. So when we're doing this by GCF, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking for the biggest number that will divide into each term. And then we're going to be looking for the smallest power variable that each term has. All right, so now we're just going to go ahead and do some examples here. Okay, so this one, it says to factor 2x squared plus 10x. So again, we would like to end up with an expression that has parentheses in it. So what we are going to start out by doing is we are going to look at the numbers. What number will 2 and 10 both go into? And that number is 2. So I'm going to leave a little bit of space. I'm just going to write down a 2 here. And then I'm going to be looking at, they both have an x. One is an x to the second and one is an x to the 1. Which one is smaller? It's the x to the 1. So we're going to write down x. That is my greatest common factor. At that point in time, I'm going to be starting parentheses. What I like to do next, some people, when you get really good at these, you can skip this step, but it's definitely a good step to do. I'm going to write that 2x underneath each term. When we factor out a greatest common factor, we're going to divide it out of each term. So now what I'm going to do for the first term, 2 divided by 2 would be 1. And then if I have x squared over x, remember we're going to subtract our exponents, so I'll end up getting x to the first power. I'm going to bring down that plus sign, and then I'm going to divide again. 10 divided by 2 is 5, and then the x's, since they are exactly the same, they actually just zap each other out. Okay, so that would be my expression. The one thing that I'm going to do to rewrite it, I'm going to write 2x. We generally don't put the 1's in the answer, so I'm not going to do that either. So this will just be x plus 5, and that would be my answer. If you were to multiply that back out, you would end up with what we started with, so that's a nice way to check to see if you did it right. Okay, number 2, once again, I'm going to start with the numbers. Excuse me. So what number would go into both 5 and 10? That number would be 5. And then this time, notice the first term has an x, but the second term does not have an x. So I am not going to factor out any variable. So it's just going to be 5. I'm going to start my parenthesis. I like to go back up to my expression, and I'm going to write dividing by 5 to each term. So the first one, 5 divided by 5 is 1. There's nothing to do with the x, so it's just going to drag down. This plus sign comes down in between. 10 divided by 5 is 2. And then again, I just like to rewrite it without that 1. So we'll just have 5 times the quantity, x plus 2. And again, if I were to multiply it out, that is the same thing that I would end up with. Okay, next problem. 6x to the third plus 4x. This time, again, I'm going to be looking for the largest number, that 6 and 4, that would go into 6 and 4. That number is going to be 2. Okay, I notice that they both have an x. This is an x to the third and an x to the 1. So the smaller of the two is x to the 1. And then I start my parentheses. I write that underneath each part. Okay, now I'm ready to divide. 6 divided by 2 is 3. If I'm combining my x's, I'm going to subtract. So 3 minus 1 will be 2. So it'll be x to the second. Bring down the plus sign. And then 4 divided by 2 is 2. And then the x's, since they are the exact same thing, they are just going to zap each other out. So then this is my factored answer right there. Okay, I'm going to have you try number 4, so would you please pause the video, give it a whirl, and then come back and see how you did. Alright, hopefully you're back and you've done a nice job on this. What I'm going to look for first is what number would go into both 6 and 9. That number will be 3. Once again, I notice that they both don't have an x, so I cannot factor out an x, so I'm just going to start my parentheses. So I'm going to write 3 underneath each term and do some division. 6 divided by 3 is 2. There's nothing to do with the x, so that will just come down. The minus sign just carries down into my problem. And then 9 divided by 3 is 3. So that will be my factored answer. Alrighty, problem number 5, 4x squared plus 6x minus 12. Notice this looks a little bit different. We just have more parts, but that is 100% okay. We are going to, on this one, once again, look at the numbers. What numbers will go into 4 and 6 and 12? And the only one that I can think of, the smallest or the largest I can think of, is 2. So 2 will go into all 3 of those. And I notice they do not all 3 have an x, so I cannot factor out an x. So it's just going to the GCF is just 2. So I'm going to write 2 underneath each part, and we are ready to divide. Okay, 4 divided by 2 is 2. Nothing to do with the x squared, so it just carries down. The plus sign carries down. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Nothing to do with the x, so the x carries down. The minus sign carries down. And then 12 divided by 2 is 6. And so that is my factored answer. Okay, number 6, let's do that same thing. I'm going to look at all 3 parts again. What number would go into 3 and 9 and 15? I know that that number will be 3. And then I do notice that they all have an x this time. So which one is the smallest? It's going to be the x to the first. So I'm just going to write down the x. I'm then going to write that underneath each part. And unless you're really good at these, please make sure you do that step. We are now ready to divide. 3 divided by 3 is 1. And then x to the third over x to the first. I'm going to subtract my exponents to get x to the second. Carry down my minus sign. 9 divided by 3 is 3. And then x squared over x, if I subtract my exponents, I'll get x to the first. And then bring down my plus sign. 15 divided by 3 is 5. And since these x's are exactly the same, they wipe each other out. And so then I am done. The only thing I'm going to do to clean this problem up is just get rid of my 1's. And that is now factored. And again, you can multiply it back out to see if you got the right answer. This next one, I am going to actually let you try problem number 7. So if you would please pause my video, see if you can find the answer, and then come back and see how you did. All right, on this one, what we are going to do is look at what number would go into all 3, 6 and 12 and 8. I would say it's going to have to be 2. So we're going to factor out a 2. They do not all have an x, so the x does not get to get factored out. So 2 is our only GCF. So we're going to divide all 3 parts by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3x squared. Carry down your plus sign. 12 divided by 2 is 6x. Plus 8 divided by 2 is 4. So hopefully you got that right. Okay, number 8 is a little bit differently just because this problem starts with a negative. If the problem starts with a negative, when I find my GCF, I'm going to include negative in it. So when I look at what number goes into 2 and 6, I know it's 2, but I'm going to factor out a negative 2. So I'm going to divide both terms by negative 2. So negative 2 divided by negative 2 will be 1x. Instead of bringing down my plus sign this time, I'm actually going to divide first. 6 divided by negative 2 is negative 3. So that's what it will look like factored. And you'll notice if I multiplied it back out, I will get what I started with. Okay, problem number 9. Negative 4x squared minus 10x. The first thing I'm going to do again, there I see the negative there, so I will be factoring out a negative. And then the number that will go into 4 and 10, once again, is 2. 2 seems to be a popular number this time. If I'm looking at the variables, x squared and x, I notice that they both have an x. The smaller one is x to the first. Okay, I'm going to write that underneath each part. Be real careful not to skip steps here. Negative 4 divided by negative 2 is 2. X squared over x, if I subtract my exponents, I'll just get x to the first, or just x. And then I'm ready to divide again. Negative 10 divided by negative 2 is a positive 5, and my x's, since they are exactly the same, are going to zap each other out. And that should be your answer factored. Okay, I'm going to let you try problem 10. Please pause the video, try it, and then come back and see how you did. Alrighty, you are back, and hopefully you did fine on this. The first thing I'm going to look at is what number goes into both of them, and that will be 5. I do notice it starts with a negative, so my GCF is going to be negative 5. Start your parentheses. Divide both parts by negative 5, excuse me. And then when I do this, negative 5 divided by negative 5 will be 1x. And then 10 divided by negative 5 will be negative 2. And then just to clean it up, I'm just not going to write the 1. And there we go. Okay, number 11, we're still factoring using the GCF, and what we are going to do on this one is look for the GCF. You'll notice this one is a little bit different because we already have parentheses, so we're going to actually in our answer end up with a little bit more parentheses than what we started with. The first thing that I notice is they both have an x plus 2 in parentheses. So that is actually going to be our GCF because they both have it. So if I'm going to put an x plus 2 out front and start parentheses just like we usually do for the GCF. Now what I'm going to do is put x plus 2 underneath each part. Okay, you'll notice the x plus 2 zap each other out. So what am I left with? I'm just left with that x, all right? And then I'm going to bring down my plus sign. And then here, the x plus 2's again zap each other out. I'm only left with 3. And so that will be the way that looks when we factor using the GCF. All right, I am going to let you try number 12. Go ahead and pause the video and come back and see how you did. Right, you'll notice in this one, again, they both have an x minus 4 in parentheses. Both terms do. So we are going to actually factor out the x minus 4, and then we're going to start parentheses just like we usually do for the GCF. I'm going to then write the x minus 4 underneath both parts. So if I write it under the first part, the x minus 4 zap each other out, and you'll notice I'm left with 2x. I'm then going to bring down this minus sign, and then once again the x minus 4 zap each other out, and I can see that I'm left with the 5. So that's what it will look like for that type of problem. And so now hopefully you are able to factor polynomials using the greatest common factor.